Nigel Farage has called on Sir Keir Starmer to condemn assaults after partygoers were stabbed at Notting Hill Carnival. A 32-year-old mother was among the victims left fighting for her life after sustaining stab wounds just before 6 p.m. on Sunday. Another 7 people were stabbed, with as many as 50 police officers also injured. The Metropolitan Police subsequently arrested 334 people, including 3 in connection with the woman stabbed on Sunday. Responding to the spate of arrests, Farage asked, will Keir Starmer condemn the 37 assaults on emergency workers at Notting Hill Carnival? Zia Yusuf, who is looking to professionalise the populist party as Reform UK's chairman, added London deserves better than the disgraceful scenes that unfolded this week at Notting Hill Carnival. We note the total lack of political condemnation from Labour leaders. Criticisms of Starmer came after the Prime Minister vowed to take on far-right protesters after a series of violent protests across England and Northern Ireland just a few weeks ago. Speaking in Downing Street's Rose Garden earlier today, Starmer doubled down on his condemnation of the thugs. He said, "We've seen shocking scenes across the nation. A mindless minority of thugs who thought they could get away with causing chaos, smashing up communities and terrifying minorities, vandalizing and destroying people's property, even trying to set fire to a building with human beings inside it. And as if that wasn't despicable enough, people displaying swastika tattoos, shouting racist slurs on our streets. Nazi salutes at the cenotaph, the very place we honor those who gave their lives for this country, desecrating their memory under the pretense, and it is a pretense of legitimate protest. Now they're learning that crime has consequences. I will not tolerate a breakdown in law and order under any circumstances, and I will not listen to those who exploit grieving families and disrespect communities." But these riots didn't happen in a vacuum. They exposed the state of our country, revealed a deeply unhealthy society, the cracks in our foundation laid bare, weakened by a decade of division and decline, infected by a spiral of populism, which fed off a cycle of failure of the last government. Reform UK Assembly member Alex Wilson also weighed in on Notting Hill Carnival by calling for Starmer to launch a similar clampdown on troublemakers. Wilson, who was elected on the London-wide ticket in 2024, called for Notting Hill partygoers who were arrested to face as harsh a treatment as rioters from July 30th to August 5th. He said, "As I saw on my visit yesterday, for the majority of attendees, Notting Hill Carnival is an important cultural celebration with a huge effort going into creating a spectacle for many Londoners to enjoy. Unfortunately, as with recent years, this year's event was again marred by several incidents of serious violence. 8 stabbings were reported, some resulting in life-threatening injuries. 67 weapons were seized, including 2 firearms. 97 police and emergency workers were assaulted while simply doing their job of keeping carnival goers safe. That a mother was stabbed in front of her child on Sunday, traditionally a day focused on children and families, is particularly appalling." The Metropolitan Police deployed over 7,000 officers, costing the taxpayer in excess of £11 million, a significant strain on London's police resources. Dealing with an event of this magnitude is far from easy, and I extend my heartfelt thanks and full support to the Metropolitan Police and all emergency workers for their dedicated efforts at this year's carnival. I wish a speedy recovery for all emergency workers injured in the line of duty. We have seen the justice system respond rapidly and decisively to unrest earlier this month, and trust an equivalent approach will be brought to bear on those arrested for serious offences this weekend. Recurring violence at Notting Hill Carnival must prompt a discussion on public safety and the policing strategies required for such a large-scale public event going forward. The Mayor needs to urgently get a grip on London's growing knife crime epidemic to prevent further tragedies in future. Speaking yesterday, Deputy Assistant Commissioner Adi Adelakan, who is in charge of the policing operation for the event, claimed officers very narrowly avoided a fatality and were tired of seeing crime scenes at the street party. Calling for carnival goers to report crime, Adelakan said yesterday, "We saw the first day marred by unacceptable violence. 3 people were stabbed and we only very narrowly avoided a fatality. Things can only get worse." Yes, that was Keir Starmer's speech today. Gosh, we're a long way away from the heady optimism of the early days of the Blair government. Now, it's fair to say, of course, we're living under different circumstances, but it was a pretty grim speech. Let's begin with law and order and his analysis of what led to the riots. He said these riots didn't happen in a vacuum. They exposed the state of our country, revealed a deeply unhealthy society. The cracks in our foundations laid bare, weakened by a decade of division and decline, infected by a spiral of populism which fed off cycles of failure of the last government. Internet providers hate when you do this, but it's not illegal. Every time they faced a difficult problem, they failed to be honest. They offered the snake oil of populism. I've never heard more nonsense in the whole of my life. The last Conservative government was the least populist government I think I've ever seen in the whole of my life. But he's perfectly clear that the reason for the riots is your fault. It's all your fault. It is society's fault. Nothing to do with government policy whatsoever. But moving on, this is the man who was going to be tough on crime. Starmer said now they're learning that crime has consequences. That I won't tolerate a breakdown in law and order under any circumstances. Really? Is that right? Is that why 147,000 people in the last year had been given community resolutions, which means nothing will appear on their police records? That includes offenses such as minor sex crimes, violence and possession of weapons such as knives. Oh. And by the way, if you want to go shoplifting, that's absolutely fine. Unless you nick 200 quid's worth, we won't even bother to have a look. And whilst he's getting tough on violent disorder on our streets, well, Prime Minister, what about the 61 police officers that were assaulted over the weekend at the Notting Hill Carnival? That's nothing to say of many of the other things that went wrong during that so-called festival. And I just wonder, I want you to answer this question for me. Is this two-tier policing from two-tier Keir? Far-right agitators are reportedly planning 11 more riots across the UK, using covert Facebook groups to orchestrate disorder without alerting police. According to The Sun, protests are scheduled in several major UK towns and cities including Taunton, Newcastle, Shrewsbury, Birmingham, Dover, Glasgow, Ballymena, Salford and Bournemouth. These demonstrations are set to take place from Friday, August 9th to Saturday, September 14th, with organizers aiming to cause disruption during the early stages of the new Football League season and continue into the following month. Local events, such as Shrewsbury's Town Flower Show, could also be affected. Despite the planned chaos, recent protests have largely failed to materialize due to strong police presence and thousands of far-left counter-demonstrations protecting cities from violence. Police have reported a total of 11 arrests in Croydon, in London and Northampton. Get the latest news straight to your phone by joining us on WhatsApp. A significant police force was on standby on Wednesday night in anticipation of extremist disorder, with claims of 100 planned protests and potentially around 30 more counter-protests nationwide. Although gatherings were expected in 41 of the 43 police force areas in England and Wales, it seems that the majority of large groups seen by police were counter-protesters and anti-racism marchers seeking to reclaim the streets from the rioters. In Bristol and London, cities saw thousands taking to the streets for demonstrations carrying banners supportive of immigration and anti-racism this evening, mirroring movements in central Birmingham with significant turnout, reports The Express. Meanwhile, counter-demonstrations took place in Middlesbrough and Sheffield, where participants displayed messages such as "Stamp out Islamophobia" and "No to racism." The Metropolitan Police have relayed that, notwithstanding largely peaceful protests, some 50 individuals congregated on North End Road, Croydon, South London, evidently aiming to cause disruption and provoke disorder. Reportedly, these groups in Croydon were seen dragging and hurling objects and lobbing bottles at police officers, leading to 8 arrests on charges including assaulting emergency workers, possession of offensive weapons and other offenses, according to the force's statement. The statement further noted this is not linked to protest. This appears to be pure antisocial behavior. Similarly, Avon and Somerset Constabulary confirmed an arrest was made after a brick was thrown at a police vehicle amid what was described as a largely peaceful protest in Bristol.